The moment I closed my eyes, I thought it was the end. I had given everything, my love, my trust, my heart, and in return, I was discarded like I was nothing. He chose her over me. The words still echoed in my mind, the final blow that shattered everything I had once believed in. I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal. I didn't feel the weight of grief. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of peace. The pain that had consumed me for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet void. But that void didn't last. I opened my eyes again, and the world around me had changed. I wasn't the same person anymore. The weight of the past, the loss, and the hurt had lifted. In its place was a quiet resolve, a knowing that I was not defined by what he had done to me. I was not the victim. I was reborn. This time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about taking control. When I looked back, I could see the moments where I had been blind to the truth, where I had allowed him to dictate my worth. I had been a fool, but I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the girl who cried for him, begged for his love. I was someone stronger. I was someone who understood that revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be dramatic. It just had to be precise. And my revenge would come in silence. He had chosen her over me. He thought that he could walk away, that he could discard me like an old shirt and find something better. But what he didn't know was that I had something he would never understand: strength. I had a second chance, and I would make him feel the consequences of his decision, not with anger or rage, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had moved on without him. I didn't need him to see me cry, to see me suffer. I would show him that I was better off without him, that I had become the person he could never have again. In that moment of rebirth, I made a vow to myself. I would not seek him out. I would not beg for explanations, nor would I accept his pity. The person who had been abandoned was gone. The woman who had loved with all her heart, who had trusted blindly, would never return. The new version of me was born out of that loss, and with that birth came a new sense of power, a power that he could never take from me again. I had suffered, yes, but suffering was not the end. It was the beginning of something new, something stronger. And as I stood there, in the stillness of my own rebirth, I knew one thing for sure. He would regret the day he walked away from me. He would see me rise, see me thrive, and he would know in his heart that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The silence I would keep would be my weapon. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't beg for him back. I would build a life he could never enter, and he would never know how much his absence had driven me to become someone unrecognizable, someone who no longer needed his validation. He would only see my success, my strength, my peace, and he would know that he had left the best part of his life behind. This time, I wasn't chasing after him. This time, I was walking away from the past, leaving it behind as I took the first steps into a future where I held all the power. I still remember the first time I met him, how everything about my life seemed to change in that very moment. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was something in the air that day, something that made everything feel different. He was there, across the room, laughing with a group of friends, and then our eyes met. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew me in. His smile was infectious, his presence commanding. I felt drawn to him, even before I knew who he was. That was the start of everything. We began to talk, and from that moment, I felt like we understood each other in a way that was impossible to explain. He was attentive, kind, and so incredibly easy to be around. There was something comforting about him, like he had always been a part of my life, even though we had just met. We talked about everything: life, dreams, fears, and in a way, I felt like I could tell him anything. And I did. I gave him pieces of myself I hadn't given to anyone before. We made plans together. I thought he was my future, the one who would be there, always. The first few months were perfect, or so it seemed. He was attentive, never missed a date, always made time for me. We laughed, we made memories, but I didn't see the signs. I didn't see that he was pulling away little by little, hiding behind excuses. I didn't notice that I was the one making all the effort, trying to hold things together, trying to keep things as perfect as they once were. I thought everything would work out. After all, how could someone like him, someone I had trusted so deeply, let me down? But slowly, quietly, the cracks started to form. At first, they were small. His messages would get shorter. Our conversation started to feel forced. He began canceling plans, telling me he was too busy. And each time, I brushed it off. He was probably just overwhelmed, I thought. He was working hard, had a lot on his plate. But I didn't realize that with each excuse, with each moment of distance, he was slipping away from me. It was on a quiet evening that I first began to feel the weight of the change. We were supposed to go out for dinner. We had been looking forward to it for days. But when the time came, he didn't show up. No call, no message. Hours passed before I heard from him, and when I did, it was a short, detached text. Sorry, got caught up with work. Let's do it another night. At first, I wasn't concerned. I was annoyed, but I tried to understand. I waited, trying to be patient. But that night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just the canceled dinner, it was the way he brushed it off. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. The next few weeks were no better. He stopped texting as much, stopped calling. I would hear from him, but only when it was convenient for him. It wasn't like it had been in the beginning. And yet, I kept holding on. I kept telling myself that he was just busy, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was wrong. Something was missing. And I couldn't fix it. I started to doubt myself, wondering if I was doing something wrong. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough to keep his attention. I began to withdraw, to question every little thing I said and did. I thought about what I could change, how I could fix things. But nothing seemed to work. It was like I was fighting a losing battle and I didn't even know who the enemy was. Was it him? Or was it me? I wanted to believe that it was just a rough patch, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was something deeper. And then, the truth hit me. It wasn't a surprise. Not really. I had suspected it for weeks, but I refused to see it. It was one evening, after I had been waiting for him to come over, when I found the text. I had gone to his apartment to surprise him, but when I walked in, I saw his phone on the couch. And then, I saw her name, Emily. It was just a name, just a text, but I could feel my heart stop. He had been messaging her while he had been avoiding me. At first, I thought it was innocent, just a friend. But as I read through the messages, I realized they were more than just friendly. There was a closeness, a bond that I didn't have with him anymore. And in that moment, I felt a sharp, painful clarity. I waited until he came home. He didn't know I knew. I didn't want to confront him just yet. I wanted to see how far he would go, how much he would reveal before I had to face the truth. And when he finally did come in, the words came out without me even having to think about them. "Who is Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His face went pale. He stuttered for a moment, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. I knew. He knew I knew. But he didn't apologize, didn't try to explain. Instead, he just looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. He told me that it had been happening for a while, that he didn't want to hurt me, but he had already moved on. He had chosen her, and I had been nothing more than a placeholder. The pain was unbearable, but I couldn't let him see it. I stood there, silent, numb, trying to keep my composure as he explained himself. He didn't even seem to care that he had shattered me. And that, more than anything, was the breaking point. He had discarded me like an old possession, something he didn't need anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or beg. I just stood there, listening to his words, watching the man I had loved walk away from me. But the truth was, I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't the girl who would chase after him, the girl who would beg for his love. I was stronger than that. I knew that the only way forward was to walk away, to leave him behind. And so, I did. The door closed behind me, but the finality of it wasn't as painful as I had imagined. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I had walked away not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And in that moment, I knew something he would never understand. I was reborn, not broken. The days that followed felt like a blur. At first, I felt numb, like I was moving through the motions without any real purpose. But then came the realization. Something deep within me began to stir. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to be the person who spent years crying over a man who didn't deserve me. I had given him my love, my trust, and now he had thrown it away. But the truth was, I had more than just those memories. I had my life, my future, and I would take it back. I wasn't going to wait around for some grand apology or for him to come to his senses. I would make my own way, and I would do it on my terms. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. It was never going to be as simple as waking up one morning and deciding that everything was going to be okay. The pain of betrayal wasn't something you could just erase, but I also knew that I had a choice. I could wallow in my pain, in the hurt he caused, or I could use it to fuel something bigger. I was determined to rise from this, not just to move on, but to thrive, to become someone stronger, someone unrecognizable from the woman I had been. The first step was to recenter myself. I had spent so long focusing on him, on us, on what I could do to fix our relationship. But now I needed to turn that focus inward. I had to start caring for myself, something I had neglected in the years we were together. I needed to rebuild the parts of me that I had lost along the way. My strength, my independence, my sense of self. These were all things I had given up in the pursuit of trying to make him happy. But now, it was time to reclaim them. I started small, but every action was a step forward. I cleaned out my apartment, getting rid of anything that reminded me of him. Photos, gifts, anything that tied me to the past. It wasn't about erasing him from my life, but rather, creating a space that was mine again. I replaced the things I had once shared with him with things that reflected who I was now, what I wanted, what I needed. The walls of that apartment began to feel like mine, like a space where I could finally breathe. The clutter, the remnants of the life we had shared, all had to go. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional as well. I had to get rid of the weight of the past, to let go of everything that had tied me to a version of myself that no longer existed. But this process wasn't just about material things. It was about reshaping my mindset, breaking free from the cycle of doubt and insecurity that had been so deeply ingrained in me. I had to rebuild my confidence, my belief in myself. I wasn't just the girl who had been abandoned. I was more than that. I was strong. I was capable. And I was worthy of something better. The next step was focusing on my career. I had always been passionate about my work, but somewhere along the way, I had put it on the back burner. I had let my relationship consume me, pushing my own ambitions aside. But now I saw this as my opportunity to reignite that passion. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove to myself that I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I started taking on projects that challenged me, projects that excited me. And with every success, no matter how small, I felt a little bit of the old me returning. I felt more confident, more in control. But it wasn't just about work. It was about taking care of my body, my mind, my soul. I had neglected my physical health for so long. I had allowed the stress and the pain to take over, to make me feel exhausted and drained. But now I started taking better care of myself. I worked out, I ate healthier, and I gave myself the time I needed to relax, to recharge. It wasn't just about changing the way I looked. It was about feeling good in my own skin again, feeling strong and capable. Every time I took care of myself, I was taking one more step toward reclaiming my power. But the most important change, the one that took the longest to implement, was in my mind. I had to stop letting my past define me. The betrayal, the heartbreak, they were part of my story, but they weren't the entire story. I had spent so long holding on to the idea that I had been wronged, that I had been abandoned, that I couldn't see the bigger picture. I had allowed the pain to define me, but now I was rewriting my own story. I wasn't the victim. I wasn't the girl who had been abandoned. I was the woman who had taken control of her life. I was the woman who had learned to rise, who had learned to thrive in the face of adversity. It wasn't easy. Every day was a struggle. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when the weight of the past threatened to pull me back down. But I didn't let it. I reminded myself that I was stronger than my circumstances. I reminded myself that I had survived worse. And with each passing day, I felt more confident in my ability to move forward, to create the life I wanted. In those moments of self-reflection, I also realized something important. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to come back. I had already moved on. I had already found my power, and I had learned the most important lesson of all. I was enough. I didn't need anyone else to validate that. And as I stood there, stronger than I had ever been, I realized that the best part of all was that I had done this for me. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my life. I was no longer the person I had been when he left me. I was someone new, someone better, and I was ready for whatever came next. The first sign that things were starting to change came when he reached out. It had been months since I last heard from him. The distance between us had been palpable, and while I had moved forward, there were moments when his presence felt like a shadow I couldn't escape. I had been strong, rebuilding my life, but it wasn't until he contacted me again that I truly realized the depth of his impact on me. I had expected him to reach out at some point. The patterns were predictable. The first message came casually. No apologies, no explanation, just a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" A part of me felt a flicker of anger, a sharp sting of betrayal. But another part of me, the part that had healed, the part that had grown stronger, was indifferent. He had lost his chance to make things right. I wasn't the same girl who had been devastated by his abandonment, but that didn't mean I wasn't curious. I didn't respond right away. The silence was powerful. I wanted him to feel it, to feel the weight of everything he had done. When I finally replied, I did it with purpose. I didn't let the emotions take over. I kept my words short, almost distant. "I've been doing well. Busy. How about you?" There was nothing warm about my tone. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't interested in reconnecting either. But he persisted. One message became two, then three. And soon he was asking to meet. He wanted to talk. He needed closure, he said. He needed to explain everything. At first, I felt a rush of emotion. The memories of the pain he had caused me resurfaced, bringing a cold edge to my thoughts. I didn't need closure from him. I had already closed that chapter, but I also knew that I needed to hear him out. It wasn't for my benefit, it was for him. I had seen what he had become, and I wanted him to see me for who I was now. I had moved on, and the power I had gained was something he would never be able to take away. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe, the same one where we had spent countless hours in the past. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a table by the window, looking almost exactly the way he had when I first met him. There was a familiar warmth to his gaze, but this time, it felt distant. This time, I wasn't the one in need of validation. I wasn't the one who would crumble under his presence. I was the one in control now. He stood up when he saw me, a nervous smile playing on his lips. "It's good to see you," he said, his voice almost too soft, too tentative. "I've missed you." I sat down across from him, studying his face. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't sad either. I was something new, something stronger. He looked the same, like the man I had loved, the man who had betrayed me. But there was something different in the way he held himself. The confidence I had once admired was gone, replaced with uncertainty. The man who had walked away from me, who had chosen someone else, was no longer the man I had once known. This man, sitting before me, was weak, broken by the choices he had made, and I wasn't the one who would fix him. "I've been thinking about us a lot lately," he began, his eyes searching mine. "I realize now that I made a huge mistake. I let you go, and I can't stop regretting it. I should have never chosen her. I should have chosen you. Please, let me explain." I didn't interrupt him. I didn't need to. He was digging his own grave with every word, with every plea. The more he spoke, the more I realized that nothing he could say would make a difference. He wasn't here because he cared about me. He wasn't here because he wanted to make things right. He was here because he was losing control. The truth was, he had already moved on, but now that he saw the life I had built without him, he was beginning to regret it. "You made your choice," I said calmly, my voice steady, "and I made mine. I've moved on. I'm not the same person I was when you left. I don't need you to apologize, and I don't need you to explain yourself." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him, but then the anger that had been simmering underneath all this time surged forward. He had discarded me, and now he wanted to come back, now that he saw that I had found strength without him. "I'm not asking you to take me back," he said quickly, his voice faltering. I just wanted to know if we could be friends again. I can't keep living with this guilt." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I truly understood how far I had come. I wasn't the person who needed his approval, his validation. I wasn't the person who would chase after him or beg him for his love. I had moved on, and I was stronger for it. I didn't need him to be a part of my life anymore. The closure he was seeking wasn't for me. It was for him. And that was where the power lay. "I think you're mistaken," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I don't need anything from you. What I needed, you never gave me. And now, I'm whole without you." I saw the hurt in his eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for him. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. He had chosen her, and he had abandoned me. And now he had to live with the consequences of his choices. The silence between us grew heavy, and I realized then that I didn't need him to be sorry. I didn't need him to regret anything, because I had already won. I stood up, ready to leave, but I paused before walking away. I looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with sadness, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had taken control of my own life. "I wish you the best," I said softly, then turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there in the cafe, a man who had lost everything because of his own choices. And as I walked out of the door, I felt the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders. It was clear from the very beginning that I had underestimated how much the past could still affect me. I thought I had moved on, that I had become immune to the pain of his betrayal, but when he reached out to me, when he asked to meet, I felt an old, familiar pull, one I hadn't felt in months. I didn't want to meet him. I didn't need closure from him, but there was something inside me that told me I had to. I had to face this final challenge, this last test, not for him, but for myself. When we met that afternoon, I was calm, almost unnervingly so. I wanted him to see me differently, stronger, more confident, more certain in who I was. I wanted him to see that I had built a life without him and that I was thriving, not struggling, as he might have thought. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. I didn't need his forgiveness or his understanding anymore. But part of me still wanted to know what he had to say, even if I knew it would be nothing more than empty words. He sat across from me in the cafe, his eyes scanning me nervously, as if he didn't quite know how to approach me. The man who had once been so confident, so sure of himself, now seemed vulnerable. It almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. But that was the thing about betrayal. It changed you. It wasn't just the man who had let me down, it was the way he made me question everything I had known. I couldn't afford to feel sorry for him. I had to stay strong. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice unsure. "I've been thinking about everything. I know I hurt you, and I really regret it. I've been a fool." I didn't interrupt. I didn't say anything at first. Part of me wanted to say something cutting, something that would make him feel the depth of what he had done to me. But I held back. I wasn't the same person anymore. The woman who would have crumbled in the face of his apology, who would have begged for his love, was long gone. This wasn't about me needing him back. It was about him understanding that I was better off without him. "I'm sorry," he repeated, more firmly this time, leaning forward. "I should have never let you go. I was selfish. I was afraid of what we had, and I ran from it. But I can see now that I've made the biggest mistake of my life." I watched him carefully, noticing how his hands fidgeted nervously. It was clear he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected me to be calm, collected, and detached. He thought I would be desperate for him to come back, desperate for him to apologize. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone to complete me. I had learned that the hard way, and it wasn't his apology that mattered. It was my peace, my strength. I had learned to find that within myself. "I don't need your apology," I finally said, my voice steady. "I don't need you to feel sorry for me. What I need is for you to understand that I am not the person I was when you left me. I've changed. I've rebuilt myself. And I don't need you to validate that." His face faltered, but he quickly tried to regain control. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. "Please don't," I said. "I've heard enough. You don't get to come back into my life and expect things to be the same. You don't get to undo the hurt you caused me with a few words." For the first time in a long while, I felt the power of silence. He didn't know how to respond, and that was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react emotionally. The days of me waiting for him, wondering why he chose her, were over. I wasn't the girl who would cry in front of him, hoping for him to choose me again. That part of me was long gone. I had learned to move forward without him. "I'm not the same person you walked away from," I continued, my voice unwavering. I've healed. I've grown. And I'm better for it. What you did to me doesn't define me anymore. It's just a chapter in my story. It's not the whole story. He looked down, visibly shaken by my words. But I didn't feel bad for him. He had caused me so much pain, so much confusion. But in that moment, I realized that I wasn't the one who had lost. He was. He had chosen her. And now he was left with nothing but regret. I had chosen myself, and that decision had made all the difference. The silence that followed felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was powerful. He had nothing left to say. He could apologize all he wanted, but it wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't change the fact that he had abandoned me, that he had broken my trust. I had moved on, and he was the one left behind. And that was exactly where I wanted him to be. I stood up, preparing to leave. But before I could turn away, I looked at him one last time. I hope you understand now, I said softly. I'm not here for you. I'm here for me, and that's all that matters. I walked out of the cafe, leaving him there, stunned and silent. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I wasn't running away from the past. I was walking toward my future, one that didn't include him. And as I walked away, I knew deep down that he would regret this day for the rest of his life. Not because of what he had lost, but because he would never truly understand what I had gained. The day he reached out again, I had already anticipated it. After all, the signs were too clear to ignore. He had finally come to the realization of what he had lost, but by the time he did, it no longer mattered. I had moved on in ways he couldn't even comprehend, and he would never be able to get back what he had discarded so easily. It was too late. And while I knew he was likely filled with guilt, remorse, and a desperate need for redemption, I felt nothing but a sense of calm, as though everything was unfolding exactly as it should. I had always believed that revenge was a wild, emotional thing, but in the quiet aftermath of his betrayal, I realized that true revenge was not something loud or overt. It wasn't about confrontation or dramatic scenes. It was about building something better for myself. The best revenge was the life I had created, the person I had become. And now that I was walking in that new life, it wasn't him that I needed to prove anything to. It was myself. As I continued to build my career, my confidence, and my happiness, I began to notice something curious. People I didn't even know well, started coming to me for advice. They started asking me how I had built such a successful, fulfilling life. How I managed to take such a devastating setback and turn it into something positive. And with every compliment, every affirmation, I could feel the old me, the broken girl who had loved too much and trusted too freely, fade further and further into the past. I wasn't doing this for anyone else, but I could feel a sense of pride swell within me with every little victory. The pain of his betrayal no longer lingered. It was as if a weight had been lifted, replaced with a sense of self-worth and empowerment that had been absent for far too long. My life was no longer tethered to him. It was mine again, and it was better than ever. But still, there were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether it had all been worth it. I had walked away from everything I thought I would have, everything I thought I needed. In those moments of reflection, I realized the depth of my growth. Walking away from him wasn't a loss. It was freedom. It was power. And then came the moment that solidified everything. I was at a charity event for my work, standing in the middle of a room full of people when I saw him across the room. He was standing near the entrance, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning the crowd. As soon as he saw me, his face dropped. He hadn't expected to see me, and I could tell by the way his gaze lingered on me, the mixture of surprise and regret in his eyes. But I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I wasn't going to be the girl he left behind, the girl he had discarded. I stayed where I was, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me rush over to him, of seeing me desperate for some explanation or apology. I didn't need to hear his reasons anymore. I didn't need him to apologize. I had already moved on, and now it was his turn to feel the weight of his own choices. It wasn't about him. It was about me. I kept my back straight and my head high as I walked away from him, as though the presence of someone who had once meant everything to me no longer held any power over me. It was in that moment that I truly understood the weight of my transformation. He had left me behind thinking I would never recover. But not only had I recovered, I had thrived. And seeing him standing there, unable to move, unable to approach me without feeling the gravity of what he had done, was all the closure I needed. In the end, I learned that my greatest strength came from my ability to move forward. I didn't need to fight to make him regret his decision. I didn't need to confront him or make him suffer. My peace was the ultimate revenge, and I had won. Months passed since that moment at the charity event, and I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. In those early days after he walked away from me, I had thought I would never fully recover. The pain was so raw, the betrayal so complete, that it seemed impossible to imagine a future where I wasn't still reeling from the hurt. But life, as it often does, moves forward, whether we are ready for it or not. And in that forward movement, I found strength. I had rebuilt my life in ways I never thought possible. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. My career had blossomed. I had stepped into my true potential, pushing boundaries and achieving goals I once thought unattainable. But more importantly, I had finally learned to love myself. The woman who had once been broken, the woman who had felt unworthy of anything other than the scraps left behind by someone else, was gone. In her place was someone strong, someone who no longer depended on anyone else for validation. Looking back, I could see how far I had come. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself to him, trying to be enough for him, trying to make him love me in a way that would fill the emptiness inside me. But I had learned the hard way that no one else could fill that void. It wasn't his love I needed. It was my own. And when I finally realized that, when I stopped waiting for someone else to make me whole, I became the person I was always meant to be. It wasn't just about my career or my independence, though. It was about the quiet peace I had found in myself, the ability to be alone and not feel lonely, the freedom to exist in a way that didn't require someone else's presence to validate my worth. I no longer looked to the past for answers, for healing, or for closure. I had given myself all of those things. I had forgiven myself for ever believing that I wasn't enough. I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to let go of the weight of the past in order to move forward. A few months after the charity event, I ran into Emily again. It was at a mutual friend's party, and when I first saw her, I couldn't help but wonder if she was still the same person who had once been the other woman in our story. But as we spoke, I realized how much she had changed too. She was no longer the naive girl who had come into our lives like a storm. She had grown, just as I had. She had come to terms with her own mistakes, and we found an unexpected common ground. We laughed about the mess we had both found ourselves in, and how much we had learned along the way. I realized that she had been as much a victim in this story as I had been. She had been manipulated too, just like I had. In the end, we both understood something important. The man who had come between us wasn't the real issue. It was the choices we made and the lessons we learned from them. We didn't need to fight anymore. We didn't need to hold on to resentment. What we needed was peace, and we had both found that in our own ways. We parted that night with a sense of mutual respect, Two women who had learned that true strength came not from tearing each other down, but from building each other up. As for him, I didn't hear from him again. I knew he was still living in the shadow of his own choices, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I had moved on, and with that movement came a sense of freedom. Freedom from the past, freedom from the chains of a toxic relationship, and freedom from the need for his approval. I had let go of the idea that he could fix what had been broken. He couldn't, and he never would. There was a time when I thought that the end of our relationship meant the end of me, that without him, I would never be whole again. But now, standing here, looking at the life I had built, I realized that I had never been broken to begin with. I was never incomplete. I had always been whole. It was just a matter of finding my own way back to myself. The future was mine now. I had learned that I didn't need anyone else to validate my existence, to make me feel worthy. I had learned that my happiness came from within, and I was in control of that. The woman who had once been broken and betrayed was now someone who stood tall, who knew her worth, and who wasn't afraid to walk away from anything or anyone that no longer served her growth. I didn't need him to regret his choices. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need his acknowledgement. What mattered was that I had found peace. I had found my strength. And in that quiet peace, in that unwavering confidence, I knew that I had won. Not because I had made him regret losing me, but because I had made myself proud of who I had become. In the end, it wasn't about him. It was about me. The man who had once been the center of my world had faded into a distant memory. He had no power over me anymore. My past no longer defined me. My future was mine to create, and I was ready for it. And so, with a quiet smile, I walked forward into the life I had built. A life filled with possibility, strength, and the certainty that I was enough. Always had been, and always would be.